This next book is called Before the Mayflower, A History of Black America by Lerone Bennett, published in 1993. We're on page 36, and I will start right here. A large proportion of the first generation of African Americans entered America with Spanish names. For some reasons that are not readily apparent, the reasons weren't readily apparent to him at this time period, but I'm about to show you why these reasons were. For reasons that are not readily apparent, many black males were called Antonio, a name that quickly became Antony or Anthony. Other popular names of the period included Michaela, Cochicello, Mingo, Pedro, Francisco, Jabina, Maria, Wortello, Tamora, Angola, and Tony Congo. Shortly after their arrival in America, many blacks discarded African and Spanish names and adopted English titles. So the first generations, or a large proportion of the first generation of African Americans, entered America with Spanish names. Let's see why that was the case. We're going to move on. This book is called Delaware's Forgotten Folk, The Story of the Moors and Nanticokes by C.A. Weslager, University of Pennsylvania Press, published in 2006. It says history. And let's look at C.A. Weslager really quick. This is an article about him, August 7th, 1994, Sunday News Journal. Weslager, historian, dies. We're just going to look at this to see some of his credentials. In a writing career that spanned 50 years, C.A. Weslager, as he was known to his readers, wrote at least 15 major books and hundreds of pamphlets and articles on history and archaeology, especially on local topics. Many of his books are now sought by collectors. The late News Journal columnist Bill Frank wrote in 1987, "Prolific may be one way to describe the ability of Dr. Clinton Albert Weslager, one of Delaware's most noted historians. Even that term, however, fails to tell the whole truth about this amazing man. I think his greatest contribution was in chronicling the early colonization of Delaware and interaction between colonists and the Native Americans," said Delaware history expert Carol E. Hoffaker, a University of Delaware professor. "It is remarkable that a person whose career was really in the business world developed such a level of expertise in both history and archaeology, so that his work was regarded as of the quality of a professional person in either field." Raised in Pittsburgh, Mr. Weslager earned a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Pittsburgh in 1933. About 1937, he joined the DuPont Company in sales and moved to Richardson Park. He edited the firm's employee magazine, was national sales manager of the Automatic Chemical Specialties Division, and was a fabrics and finishes marketing manager. After retiring from the firm in 1968, he taught Delaware history at Wesley College and the University of Delaware before joining the history faculty of Brandywine College, north of Wilmington, which eventually became a branch of Widener University. When he retired in 1983, he was named Professor Emeritus. He was also consulted with Reader's Digest, Temple University Press, and the Smithsonian Institution. In the late 1930s, he began working with the University of Pennsylvania anthropologist Frank G. Speck, an expert on the Nanticokes, an American Indian tribe based in Sussex County. After helping Speck with research, Mr. Weslager wrote his first book, Delaware's Forgotten Folk, published by University of Pennsylvania Press in 1943. So that's the book we're about to read right now. Let's get into it and see what it says. Alright, so this is Delaware's Forgotten Folk, The Story of the Moors and Nanticokes by C.A. Weslager. We just finished reading about him. Let's see what he has to say about this topic that we've been researching. And let's see if it corroborates any of the other information that we've been going over. Now remember, this guy, he was an actual historian, professor. He's not a pseudo. He has credentials. We looked through them. So let's get into it. We're on page 3. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to start right here. The first Negro recorded by name on the Delmarva Peninsula was called Anthony. Remember, we just read in the other book how a lot of first generation African Americans came with Spanish names, and Anthony was one of the names it listed. He was described as an angler or Moor, and was delivered near present Wilmington in 1639. Anthony may have been a Negro, often called Blackmore, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. Now don't let this part throw you off right here where it says he may have been a Negro, and I'm going to explain why. Let's keep reading first, though. Moors, as we know, were often wrongly classified as Negroes and seized by their enemies and sold into slavery. The true Moors were natives of Morocco and Africa and were conquered in the 7th century AD, we're on page 4 now, by the Arabs and converted to Mohammedanism, which is Islam, and Arabic custom and language. In 711 AD, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquests on the Spanish peninsula. It was during these conquests that many Moors were captured, and their descendants sold to the slave traders who brought them in shackles to America. Now let's go back up. It says that the first Negro was a Moor, and then it goes on to say he may have been a Negro, often called Blackamoor, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. Moors, as we know, were often wrongly classified as Negroes, so don't let this part throw you off. We looked at photos of Moors, statues of Moors. We read old books saying they were Negroes and black-skinned, and that they were a black race who inhabited Africa, primarily North Africa. So this scholar, we read this was originally published in 1943, I believe, and then it was republished in around 2004, I believe. So this guy, he most likely didn't believe the term Negro was appropriate for the Moors because the Moors had their own identity. They were Moors. Negro is a derogatory and offensive byword that was placed on all black-skinned people who, were known to inhabit Africa. That term was placed on them by Europeans, and the author is just trying to make a distinction between the Moors versus the native black African Negroes who had nothing to do with the Moors. Also, if they were wrongly classified as Negroes, then that obviously means they looked just like so-called Negroes, just like the black Jews in Luango that we read about, who were said to resemble the native African Negroes in every way, although those black Jews weren't called Negroes themselves. Regardless, right here is the key part. It says in 711 AD, these Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquests on the Spanish peninsula. It was during these conquests that many were captured and their descendants sold to the slave traders who brought them in shackles to America. So regardless of how he uses the word Negro here in this book, black people, or so-called Negroes, quote unquote, are the only people who were brought to America in shackles. So that's how we know it's talking about the blacks of the transatlantic slave trade. So that should clear everything up without a question and without a doubt. And let me clarify once again, because you don't want to, give people a way to try to explain this away. The author's usage of the word Negro here isn't important because he clearly says the Moors were brought in shackles to America, and we all know that black people were the only people brought to America in shackles. And near the end of part 2, I already went over the term Negro and demonstrated its different usages. And if you want to get technical, we aren't even Negroes anymore, black people in America. We haven't been Negroes since, how they have that. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme. They have the meme saying that first we were called slaves, then it went to Negroes, then blacks, then Afro-Americans, then African-Americans or whatever. So however long ago, I believe it was like around the 1990s, they stopped calling us Negroes and we're African-Americans now. So that just goes to show how the term Negro is not, a good way to distinguish the people being spoken of in these documents. Now we're going to keep reading and break down this last part that we read on page 4 in just a second. But before we continue on, I want to point out this part right here again. It says Anthony may have been a Negro, often called Blackamoor, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. First, it says he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. This just goes to show and confirm that the Moors were so swarthy or black that they could have been classified as Negroes. If they were being wrongly classified as Negroes, that goes to show that the word swarthy was obviously being applied to people during that time period who were Negroes or Negroid, or who looked like they were Negroes or Negroid. But like I said, let's not get caught up in that word. But this just goes to show that when I was showing the images of the Moors and all that, and it said the Jews were as swarthy as the Moors, it was talking about people, with a Negroid or Negro-like appearance. This just confirms that even further. But more importantly, it says Anthony may have been a Negro, often called Blackamoor, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. So it's saying he may have been a Negro, often called Blackamoor, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. So it appears he's trying to make a distinction between Blackamoor and Moor here. He's saying he could have been a Blackamoor or a Moor. But let's go here real quick. We're back on JSTOR, the JSTOR website. We're in the book. I don't know if this is a book or a paper, but it's called Keywords of Identity, Race, and Human Mobility in Early Modern England. This is the author. It looks like it was published in 2021, Amsterdam University Press. And this chapter is called Blackamoor/Moor. I'm going to zoom in. This website's kind of funky when you try to read books. But let me see if this has a page number. It doesn't, but this is the source. You know, you can find it on your own. It says Blackamoor, Moor. Moor and Blackamoor are two English words that were highly influenced by Iberian and Italian designations of northern African peoples. So Iberian, this is going back to Spain and Portugal. So we can see on this page in this document, it's saying that Blackamoor and Moor are pretty much the same word. They're the same. It's the same word, or two different words to describe the same people or person, I should say. And just to confirm even further that the word Moor and Blackamoor are the same word, or describing the same group of people or the same type of people. On Wikipedia, it says Blackamoors. And it says Blackamoors may refer to, and it has a whole bunch of different things it could refer to. And we can see right here, the last entry says Moors, Muslim of Spain and North Africa. So Blackamoors is the same word as Moor. So don't let that throw you off. So now that we cleared that up, let's read it again. The first Negro recorded by name on the Delmarva Peninsula was called Anthony. He was described as an angler or Moor and was delivered near present Wilmington in 1639. This is a place in America, probably one of the 13 colonies. Anthony may have been a Negro, often called Blackamoor, or he may have been a swarthy Moor of non-Negroid stock. We just went over how either way it's talking about black people, Moors, regardless of what the author refers to them as here. Moors, as we know, were often wrongly classified as Negroes and seized by their enemies and sold into slavery. We already went over that too, so don't let it throw you off, why they were wrongly classified. The true Moors were natives of Morocco and Africa and were conquered in the 7th century AD by the Arabs and converted to Mohammedanism and Arabic custom and language. In 711 AD, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquests on the Spanish peninsula. It was during these conquests that many were captured and their descendants sold to the slave traders who brought them in shackles to America. So like I was saying earlier, the only group of people ever brought to America in shackles are black people. This is saying that over time after the Moors were conquered, their descendants eventually ended up in America in shackles. Now, very, very quickly before we continue on, I wanted to go to the last page of the book, or this, on the actual physical book, this is probably the back cover. Let me zoom in. It says, by carefully searching old state records and antiquated sources, by utilizing all possible anthropological findings, and by making close ethnological investigation among the people themselves, Weslager, who's the author of this book, has prepared a study of profound sociological significance. In a simple, straightforward style, he presents a saga of the Nanticokes of Indian River and the so-called Cheswold Moors by Pennsylvania history. And we can jump down to this part right here. C.A. Weslager's Delaware's Forgotten Folk chronicles the history of the Nanticoke Indians and the Cheswold Moors. The Cheswold Moors, keep that in mind, from John Smith's first encounter with the Nanticokes along the Cuscacarawak River in 1608 to the struggles faced by these uniquely multiracial communities amid the racial and social tensions of mid-20th century America. It explores the legend surrounding the origin of the two distinct but intricately intertwined groups, focusing on how their uncommon racial heritage, white, black, and Native American, shaped their identity within society and how their traditional culture retained its significance to their present. So what it's saying here on the back of the book is that these Moors, this particular group of Moors, the Cheswold Moors in Delaware, because this book's called Delaware's Forgotten Folk, it's saying that they were multiracial. It says their uncommon racial heritage, white, black, and Native American. So, black, where did the black come from? They were already black. They were Moors, brought in shackles to America, their ancestors. The white mixture and the Native American mixture obviously came once they got to America. There were Europeans in America. The Europeans were bringing them to America. As we read, they were brought in shackles to America. And then once they got here, Native Americans were here. So it says the Cheswold Moors are the particular group of Moors that we were reading about in this book. This is an article from turtlegang.nyc. It says the Moors of Delaware right here. Let's see what they look like. We can see a lot of them look like black people, like people who could be related to us. But they also, you can see some mixture. The Native American and white. All right. And we've already went over why that is. It doesn't mean they were mixed before they came over here. They were black. And then the mixture happened when they got here between Europeans and Native Americans. And it's very important to note and to keep in mind that although these descendants of Moors are mixed, the information we're dealing with is not saying that all of them are. We're just dealing with information about one group of Moors that happens to be in Delaware. Do not lose sight of the fact that the importance of the information we're dealing with right now is that this is evidence that Moors, black people with ancestry going back to Spain and Portugal, were brought to America in shackles. It says the Moors of Delaware. Growing up black in Delaware, Newcastle County, Delaware. And I scroll down a little bit, it says Moors make up the largest portion of the total population, a little over 300 persons, of the small community of Cheswold, Kent County, Delaware. So, like I said, I really didn't even have to go over all this, the words and what they mean and all that and how not to let it throw you off, because it right here clarifies and says that the people he's talking about, the Moors, they were brought to America in shackles by slave traders after a certain point in time. After being kicked out of Spain and Portugal or whatever, and after being conquered, their descendants ended up in America as slaves. Now, the reason this is important is because I showed evidence of how the Moors looked in Spain and Portugal, and also documents saying that the Jews were as swarthy as the Moors, the Sephardic Jews. And I also brought out a document saying that amongst the Moors, there were many Jews. So, you see where I'm going with this now. Now, this presentation is about Sephardic Jews in America. We just pulled some evidence up showing right here that Moors were brought to America. And even though I brought out the document saying that Jews, Sephardic Jews, were amongst the Moors, we can't really say, aha, you know what I mean? Not from this source alone. But let's go on to the last book and see what this last book has to say about all of this. Now we've reached the final book in part 3 of this presentation. Let's see what it's called. Carolina Genesis, Beyond the Color Line by Scott Withrow, published in 2010, another recent, very modern source. So before we get into it, let's quickly read a little bit about Scott Withrow, the author of this book. This is NGU News, North Greenville University. The title of this article is Retired History Instructor Donates Book Collection for Student Research. This is Scott Withrow. Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences, Dr. Paul Thompson, said the acquisition is an important addition to the university's library. He's talking about the books that Scott Withrow has donated to the library of this university. The history department is very excited about this donation. As an instructor, Mr. Withrow has been a well-loved and valuable asset to the department because of his passion for local history and Cherokee history, and now in retirement, he continues to bless our department with this generous donation of important history books, said Thompson. We are grateful for his donation. Withrow taught Western civilization, history of Appalachia, colonial history, United States history, Cherokee history, and environmental history of the South during his time at North Greenville University, and said his collection is now more valuable to NGU students than himself. And then he goes on to say how he used the books when he taught the classes and whatnot. Withrow began teaching at North Greenville University in 1986 and retired in 2017. So now that we've read a little bit on him, let's get into this book. We're going to be on page 58. Now this book by Scott Withrow, it delves into the, ancestries of different people who lived in this area of Carolina, and it uses tools such as history, DNA, and other things. But what we really want is right here at the bottom of page 58. We want the footnotes. It says, C.A. Weslager, let me zoom in. C.A. Weslager, Delaware's Forgotten Folk, The Story of the Moors and Nanticokes, the book that we just read, Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania in 1943, and he quotes what we read in that book. Let's see what he says. In 711 AD, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquest on the Spanish peninsula. After governing Spain for 800 years, the Moors were defeated by the Christians, Celtics, and many of their descendants were sold to the slave traders who brought them in shackles to America, like we just read in the previous book. Some of these Moors were Mozarabis or Sephardic Jews. Mozarabis means new Christians. I believe that's an Arabic word. It means simply new Christians. Jews who converted to Christianity for one of the many reasons, mainly for being persecuted. But it talks about the Moors being brought in shackles to America. And then it says some of these Moors were Mozarabis or new Christians or Sephardic Jews, whom Gadala identifies with the ancient Egyptians. Now he mentions another person who identifies the Sephardic Jews with the Egyptians, but we don't care about that. What we want right here is it says some of these Moors were Sephardic Jews. BHI did not write this book.